Hello everyone and welcome to today's Intel session where we'll be going through all the practical applications of AI for law firms. Today joining me is Matthew Golab, who is the Director of Legal Informatics and Research and Development at Gilbert Tobin. Matthew, welcome. It's a pleasure to have you.
Hi, thanks. I'm excited to be here.
We do have quite a jam-packed session today, so before we get stuck in, I'll just very quickly run through a couple of housekeeping rules and then I will pass over to Matthew to introduce himself. There will be a dedicated Q&A session at the end of the presentation. So if at any point throughout the session you've got any questions for Matthew, please submit them using the Q&A button at the bottom of your screens. I will note that a large part of today's questions has been formed based on a lot of the audience questions that have already come through the registration process. So I do hope that those get answered for you as we go through the interview. And just because everyone always does ask, yes, the session is being recorded and you will receive the link to the on-demand recording in the next day or two. So just keep an eye out on an email from Practice of All. Other than that, I hope that you enjoy the session. And Matthew, over to yourself. I'd love it if you could introduce yourself briefly to the audience before we get going with the interview.
Cool. Thanks, and apologies, we're a bit over time starting. That was me trying to use fancy technology in a meeting room, and instead I'm now on my laptop, so it's all me. So I'm sorry. I know everyone's time is very valuable. So my name is Matthew Golab. I'm at the law firm Gilbert and Tobin. I've been here since 2011. I was at Allen's prior, and I started at Allen's in '99. I have a library background originally preceding Allen's, and all of my law firm career, so the 25 years in law firms or ish, has been in e-discovery and kind of large scale data issues, which is typically the definition of e-discovery, but there's also other data things that we do. In a nutshell, that's who I am. That's why I'm here, and I'm super interested in all forms of AI, but particularly generative AI. That's kind of one of my hobbies outside of work, as well as what I do at work too.
Well, I suppose a good place to start the conversation is to explain, Matthew, in plain terms, what generative AI actually is and how does it differ from other forms of AI?
Mhm. Um, so I, I guess if you think of two different forms of AI, one is machine learning, and machine learning has been around for a really long time. It's a very old and established technology. And then we've got generative AI. So generative AI there was a breakthrough in 2015 by researchers at Google, where they proposed models that were the very, very early predecessors to today what we think of GPT. The P and the T in GPT mean pre-training, and I guess that's, if you think about it, machine learning means humans do the training, and then after a certain investment of human effort, you get a return on that effort. With GPT and with generative AI, there's been a lot of pre-training. So your effort you expend is very minimal. You're simply describing something, putting in a prompt, and you get a result from that prompt. So that's really the main difference. I guess other differences is that with machine learning and with kind of fairly old-fashioned and non-sexy AI, they're typically run on systems that it's in your system. It's part of your server. Whereas with GPT, so ChatGPT and the equivalent, so and really the big ones out there are OpenAI and ChatGPT. And so there's kind of several flavors of OpenAI. There's the chat interface, ChatGPT, where you can access that for free, or you pay some kind of subscription. And then there's a derivative of that by Microsoft called Copilot, which to all intents and purposes is a very similar offering to OpenAI. It's hosted by Microsoft, whereas the OpenAI one is hosted by OpenAI. And then you have the same very similar system, which can be accessed by computers by a computer terminology called API. So it's programmers can design programs to interact with a model and do magical things sometimes. Then there's so they're but most of these are cloud hosted, and so with cloud hosting, then you have if you're using a free model, you have not signed any contract or any confidentiality, anything. So you're doing something for free. So you should assume that there's absolutely no confidentiality protections for you, and you should assume that the whole internet can access what you've just done. There was something interesting that came up in the last couple of weeks. Everything in generative AI is an incredible. It's like you're in the crucible being burnt. You're at the beach. You're holding sand in your hands, and it all blows away. Everything changes, and there's a poor analogy, so I'm sorry, but everything changes really rapidly. But something that came up. There's several systems out there which kind of back up the internet. So one of them is called the Wayback Machine, and others. And these systems have been indexing, and some Google indexing as well, have been indexing publicly shareable links to chats and things. And basically, if you have shared something, it's quite probably that has been indexed, and therefore these things are accessible out there. And there've been some fairly quite sensitive things have been found by researchers in these backup machines. Anyway, so OpenAI, GPT, Microsoft obviously Copilot, and we're all familiar with those of a certain vintage would remember Clippy, which was very annoying. And in a way, Copilot is bringing back Clippity and being somewhat annoying, pestering you, depending on what version of Microsoft Office you have, but pestering you, trying to be helpful. Microsoft also has open research things. So that one of their models is called Phi, P-H-I, and that's interesting because you can download that, and it was I don't know if you've heard, but Windows 11 is coming with something horrific called recall. And recall is meant, it's a good idea, I guess, but it's meant to be the computer is going to catalog and record every single action you take on your computer. And that is stored in a database, and you can retrieve things. So it's interesting, but kind of frightening for a law firm recall. But anyway, I'm not a security person, I'm just saying it's frightening. Then the two other primary models are Anthropic, and Anthropic have a model called Claude, and the same thing, Claude has a chat, and it has a API version. And then you have Google and their Gemini models, which both Anthropic and Google are generally cloud-based. You can't really download these. And then there's all sorts of other cloud. For example, Amazon have their AWS system, and so a lot of these models can be stored and made available to you in Amazon or in the Microsoft ecosystem called Azure. Anyway, I'll stop. I've probably gone way overboard with what it is.
No, it's definitely something that an hour certainly isn't enough to cover off in, but no, I appreciate the detail in the background. It just shows how many options that are becoming available to law firms, and it can be a little bit difficult to grasp as to which direction to go in. So I wanted to ask you, with AI being out there and available for quite some time now, for the last few years, where do you currently see it delivering the clearest productivity or efficiency gains for law firms specifically?
I can't help myself, but before I answer, Marina has just posted a question about Grok 4. That's very true, Marina, but I guess Grok is look, Grok is linked with Elon Musk and X, and somewhat controversial, but yes, Grok is also a very capable model, and the X AI team were able to do amazing things in how quickly they built up their supercomputer to build that model and what that model can do. So yes, you're right. You're dead right. There's Grok as well. Anyway, going back to your question. So it's an excellent question. What are you getting when you pay for these systems? What are you getting for it? Excellent question. To give you a non-answer, the first answer is it's too early to say, really. These systems are really immature, and how we integrate them into the day of the a lawyer's day and how they are integrated is really early days and how they can help. But to me, the two key areas are large-scale document review. So e-discovery and due diligence would be two where definitely generative AI can help in some ways in those. To be contradictory, generative AI isn't great for really large volume tasks. And it's not great for two primary things. One is you pay for the interaction with the AI system by something called a token. And a token is kind of like a certain amount of characters in a word, between 3 to 4 characters. So if you give it, 100-page document, that may be, my maths isn't that great, might be 6,000 tokens or something. And so you're paying for that interaction. You're paying as you send the tokens to the system, and then you're paying for the return of those tokens. And so in e-discovery and due diligence, you can do with some pretty large volumes. So the cost of using these models and the computational overhead in how long it takes for the system to understand what you've asked it to do with current barriers to how extensively it's used in those areas. And then the other area would be contract drafting, negotiation, review. I think that's something that, and that's kind of been around for a while, but definitely there's some generative AI solutions out there which are definitely showing a lot of promise in contract work. So, or I guess if you pull back, I'm talking about disputes and litigation and M&A work, basically. The kind of the two big pillars of large commercial law firms.
Yeah. One of our audience members would like to know, what are the most realistic quick wins that we can expect from using AI in daily practice?
I guess the first one is that it's really easy to use, because unlike most technology where you're forced to conform to how the technology works and you have to be trained in using a system, generative AI, you talk with it in natural language. You can speak to it, you can show it video, you can enter text. And so you get a return very quickly. That's a non-answer, I know, but also that's part of the beauty of generative AI in terms of prompting, meaning you give it instructions. The more proficient you become and the more creative you are and detailed you are in instructing a model, the better the results you get. In a way, it's not that different to supervising a paralegal. The better your instructions, the better results you get from the model. To give you more answers, like I guess in lengthy and complex documents, then most models are pretty good at summarizing and giving you key points or action items or things to think about from large complex documents. Summaries of emails and a level of triage of emails are probably the quick wins. Emails are both a blessing and a curse, but that's how we communicate these days. So.
Yeah. Matthew, do you have any real life examples of AI being applied in a way that has improved legal decision making or outcomes that come to mind?
One would be Robodebt. which is not the best example, but if you think of algorithms, then algorithms are, in a way, some forms of AI are also algorithms where it's given some input. The model has some form of predetermined decision making and risk assessment, and it's quantifying in natural language, you've asked me this, versus it's tuning or training or parameters, and it's giving you a response. I won't harp on about robot anymore, but I guess contract review and, you know, the idea of your paper. So if you're at, say, a large insurer or a large bank, and then typically your contracts are always in your favor and they're in your terminology, therefore AI can absolutely help you with decision making in the review and looking for anomalous or things that are different to your standard or your precedents. Another one would be, or if you think about it, risk assessment, low risk or high risk. Not really answering your question because it's too early days, but they're my attempts at answering that question.
No, thank you for that. How does Gen AI differ from traditional tools like technology-assisted review, both in how it works and what it delivers? And I know you touched a little bit on that at the start, but can you expand on that in any way?
Yeah, I mean, just on the cost issue, today almost every generative AI integration into a product or augmentation, you're either paying a greater license fee or you're paying on top of your existing license fees, additional fees for the use. With the old school tar, cow, whatever, when they were first introduced, they kind of, in Australia, they slowly became popular from, say, 2010, 2011 onwards. And so in the early days, you'd pay a per document or some kind of per unit fee for the use. And then eventually that got baked into the system. And so you weren't paying extra. But really, if you think about it, in document review, say you have 50,000 documents, depending on how you train a model in terms of humans looking at making decisions and then those decisions are training the model, it's called machine learning. If you review, you know, say 5,000 to 10,000 documents, then so that is a significant effort, reviewing 5,000 to 10,000 documents. If you think, say, the cost of reviewing a document is $10 or $5, you know, that's a non-trivial amount. But depending on how you've selected your training set, you hit this stability where the machine learning model has been trained and it's satisfied that it understands all the different variations or form of document, and it gives a highly precise prediction on, it's kind of giving a binary prediction. It's either yes or no, so relevant or non-relevant. Whereas with generative AI, you certainly wouldn't give generative AI 50,000 documents because it would take a long time and cost a lot. But you'd give it 100 or 500 or 30, and you'd write a prompt. And in your prompt, typically you're giving it, here's some background information, key people, dates, and here are some factual things I'm looking for. And the model, depending on the implementation, the model is then able to do several things. It can classify and do the prediction against your sample set, so the 50 documents, and say they're relevant or not relevant. It may be able to give you an explanation as to why it's made that decision. And there's a level of iterative training where you can adjust your prompt and adjust based on where it's saying positive and negative, to see if it will fit what you perceive is positive and negative, meaning relevant or irrelevant. That's a little dangerous because it's very easy to fall in the trap of what's called overfitting, I think. But basically you fine-tune your prompt to perfectly fit the 50 documents, but that doesn't necessarily fit all your 50,000 documents. So it's early days, but yeah, it's more scale. And obviously it's a lot easier to write a prompt to apply to a set of documents than it is to review 5 to 10,000 documents. That's the
Yeah.
main.
From your perspective, what do you think is the right balance between adopting newer Gen AI features and then continuing to rely on more proven AI systems?
So with the generative AI new, there's a level of investment you need to make as a business, as an organization, in experimenting and piloting and understanding, because at the end of the day, you need to embrace this and work out where it's appropriate, where it's not appropriate, and how to train and integrate. So how to train your workforce, and how to integrate this into your workflows and give guidance in, you shouldn't use it in these scenarios and it's okay to use it in other scenarios. With experimenting and piloting, that comes at a very real cost in people's time and getting the right people. And those kind of blue moon scenarios of getting the right situation where you have a technology, something comes up in a matter, it's low risk in that you may or may not need to get approval from the client or the partner, and it's successful. Not every pilot is successful, and so there's also a technology fatigue that builds up where we're all busy people. We have to do our day jobs, and you also have to keep an eye on what is the future and what is coming, and investing energy and so experimenting. So the balance is a tricky one, very tricky. And I was reading a report earlier this morning. I'm a very sad person, but I spend since about October and November 2022, I spend about 30 to 40 minutes every day of my life, if not more, looking at AI things and keeping on top of these things. And there was a study recently by MIT where a very significant amount of generative AI projects run by corporates or run by organizations result in failure. It's very early days, quite a big investment.
Just to your point around that, a lot of vendors obviously coming out now saying that they've got AI features or functionality embedded into their software, they're working on that. For the lack of better term, how would you cut through that vendor hype when every product now claims to be AI powered?
I don't know if vendors are on this call, but to make a joke, I was very fortunate. I was in a conference in the US last week called ILTACon. ILTA is an organization, I'm not trying to spruik ILTA, but ILTA is an organization for any technology and law firms, predominantly US, but global. And so I was in the vendor hall. There's like 4,500 people there and 600 vendors or something. And so my strategy was generally at the stall, I'm being facetious, but generally at the stall, the person in the background who doesn't really meet your eyes and isn't uncomfortable talking is generally the person you want to talk to, because they have zero interest in the hype, and they're the actual person who builds the system. So it's really difficult getting through the vendor hype and the product claims. And it wasn't that long ago when you'd ask questions and no one would be prepared to give you any answers about what technologies and what systems, because they felt it was proprietary. And anyway, it's been nice with generative AI because there's so few systems out there, so you can ask and people are kind of willing to tell you. But how should you cut through the vendor hype? I guess you need to understand what model are they using, where is that hosted? Is it geographically in Australia? What are the costs? What third parties are used by that vendor for their ecosystem? So not just that system, but they may use other systems as well. What measures do they have in place for what's called guardrails? But there's all sorts of dystopian worries about generative AI in that there's a lot of stuff where it's been proven by researchers that you can quite easily exfiltrate, meaning extract content out of a generative AI system. And as the current flavor cool thing is what's called agentic AI, but agents. So the idea of the AI sits there and it has lots of little agents doing tasks. And so one agent may be to send an email. And so there's a lot of worrying researchers, the results of security researchers proving how easy it is to get around the safeguards and exfiltrate and send out data completely out of your control, which is very troubling. You probably can't ask vendors about that stuff, but about hallucinations and what hidden prompts or what system prompts do they have in place so there's going to be a level of prompting instructions by the provider of the AI model as well as the vendor. So just to have greater visibility. But yeah, it's very difficult getting through vendor hype. Very, very difficult.
This is actually a great segue into our next set of questions, because we did get quite a few questions from the audience around compliance and security risk and data protection. So just wanted to focus on that for a little bit. What are the biggest compliance and confidentiality considerations that firms need to manage when deploying Gen AI?
I guess to think differently. I'm not a lawyer, but there's the obligations of any law firm, solicitor, to keep a file for 5 years, 10 years, whatever the retention period is. And so imagine, and I believe that retention period is once you close the file, you have to keep it by a major client 10 years later. What did you do? What model did you use? So it's kind of a bit awkward and certainly something we did at G&T was a lot of scrutiny of all client engagement letters to work out and to do a level of engagement with our clients in those who we needed to get approval from and have a conversation with, those who we obviously everyone has different grades of client in how much energy you invest in that client. But yeah, it's a tricky one. And we have an embargo list where every time you use generative AI, you need to be very careful in asking yourself the question on how sensitive is this information? Should I ask the partner? Should I ask the client for approval? Do you have some form of embargo list where there's already been a level of pre-vetting and it's very clear? So you can imagine, like, if you're doing defense work or child sexual abuse, those kinds of areas that it'd be a very hard no. You are not to use models for highly sensitive things. So compliance and confidentiality are really, really difficult, particularly because predominantly all the models come out in the US and the model is hosted in the US and the processing of data occurs in the US and takes quite some time for a new model to be released to the Australian market. And so you have this awkwardness and you want to use it, you want to experiment, or you want to use the latest features, but it's not yet released in Australia. And then there's all sorts of, I'd imagine a lot of law firms are using subscribers to Microsoft M365, so the Microsoft Office suite in the cloud. And so with that, depending on your contracts with Microsoft, you get a footprint in the Microsoft cloud, the Azure cloud. And then depending how big your footprint is, you get levels of greater levels of control and visibility. And one of those is you can have your own models hosted in your tenancy, in your Microsoft Suite, and then you can interact with that where theoretically, and it hasn't been proven otherwise, that is a safe way to interact with AI. But to me, this is a really, really big area that hasn't really been properly tested yet. And
Yeah.
I'm sure no one on this call wants to be the one who is tested in this area.
Yeah, you might be right about that. You mentioned hallucinations before as well, which is a big concern for a lot of firms that are trying to dabble in AI. What are some practical steps that lawyers can take to validate their AI outputs before relying on them?
So I guess most AI systems are like a incredibly brilliant and incredibly energetic paralegal who can work 24 hours a day and do anything and really wants to impress you and wants to show you how good they are. I'm sure everyone's known people like that. And, so that's not that different to a paralegal who is like that. So you need to be very careful in your instructions and very, 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 very close scrutiny of the output and the results. There are ways in prompting to, and prompting, by the way, is some really, really weird, dark art where the models keep changing and the prompts keep changing. So there's different schools of thought about are you polite and are you saying please and kind of using emotional bribery to get better results from the model. And there's other things which seem to say some models during the American summer are a bit lazy because the Americans have their summer break, at the moment, and all sorts of odd things. But hallucinations is a really significant issue that we face. And there's a French researcher called Damien Charlotin. I probably mangled his last name, so I'm sorry, Damien, but Damien maintains the AI hallucination cases database, and I can share a link later, but that database currently has 307 cases worldwide where these are decisions where hallucinations have been used in, the case citations. So it's an enormous issue. And just looking at the database, just this week, there've been one Australian one, Ohio, Indiana, the US, and sorry, two Australian ones in the last week. It's really, really, really challenging and difficult.
Beyond hallucinations, is there any guardrails or governance structures that firms should put in place before rolling out the AI broadly?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm not a risk or governance person, but absolutely. It, and in a way, I guess it's a really important aspect of, so for example, when I run or any pilot that's run within the firm, whatever we're, regardless of what sophistication or what license we have with the system we're piloting, we'll always use some form of public data where we've downloaded it from the internet. So yes, that may not be the right thing to do from a copyright perspective, but we are never, ever using client data to pilot a system. And we would only use client data once we're satisfied and have proper contracts in place with that system. Obviously the one primary thing is from a guardrail and governance is, are you paying for the AI system, and is that system within the control of your firm, and having an understanding of the ecosystem that supports that AI, because there's always third-party systems that are in place. And if you think it, just to go off on a dystopian a worrying tangent, but if you think of all of the data breaches out there that occur, almost all of them are a breach of a third party so the Qantas thing, that was I think a call center or something in the Philippines where the breach occurred. So it's the third parties that would worry me. And then you've got, do you have contracts in place with these providers? What retention what retention policies are there in place by the primary system you're using and the third parties, understanding who has access to that data, and are they doing any form of training against your data, and what level of human oversight is there against your data, the model, and these models change all the time. So what options there are for you, say 5 years in the future, where you did a body of work using a model at that point in time, what options do you have 5 years in the future to repeat that work? Because one of the difficult things about generative AI is if you give the same prompt 6 different times, you'll probably get 6 different answers. Very tricky. But yes,
Yeah.
that this area of governance and confidentiality are two really, really big areas.
Yeah.
The final would be testing. So do you have some form of benchmarking or test case where you can then repeat the same set of actions against new models if you're piloting or a new version is released, so you get satisfied in the strengths and weaknesses of the model?
Mm. Matthew, I've got one last question on the topic, which is a little bit more targeted, but how do copyright and data ownership issues come into play when using Gen AI for drafting, research, or precedent building specifically?
This is a really enormous issue. So in the US, they seem to, I'm not a lawyer, remember, but they seem to have a fair use approach. That if it's on the internet and it's accessible, it's fair use. You can do whatever you want with it. And obviously our system is not like that. And if you think of OSLI, and you think of the courts and Thomson Reuters and LexisNexis and the legal publishers, all of these. So if you want, you'd think the OSLI system is publicly accessible, so you could build things on it, but there are very clear terms in place on the use of the OSLI system where you're not allowed to train it, and they have contract terms in place with the publishers. I'm not a copyright expert, and I see, interestingly, that the Productivity Commission has recently this week released a report where they're suggesting that we should follow the US model of we need to catch up in Australia, and it should be fair use as well, is my non-legal interpretation of what the Productivity Commission is saying. But it's a really big issue in Australia. And if you think of it, we're a fairly closed system where you're just not allowed to legally use content and train on that content.
Let's move on. I've got a few more questions, but I can see the Q&A box is flashing continually. So I want to make sure we've got a bit of time for the audience questions that have just come through. Which legal software platforms?
Sorry, and I guess also with the Q&A, what we could do, if you could download them, then I could have an attempt at, I won't use AI, I promise, but have an attempt at responding to each one, and then you could answer, or they could be shared with everyone. So sorry, keep going.
No, absolutely, yeah. Which legal software platforms are embedding Gen AI most effectively today, and what should firms watch out for?
So I guess there's two things. There's e-discovery in the litigation process. So not just the discovery process, but pre-discovery and post-discovery. So chronologies and so on. That's one area. You've got general purpose things like Harvey and other systems like that. Harvey being the most noteworthy, where they're a system that is trained for a series of tasks or playbooks, and that system can give you pretty good results. And then the other would be, to me, the unknown is document management systems and practice management systems, where so I manage in NetDocs and whatever the practice management systems, so Elite and so on. Because if you think about it, in every, in the utopian tech view is all of your data is open and off you go. It's a wonderful, beautiful world. Whereas the reality in law firms is we have very strict controls in place for management of client data, and you have information barriers and all sorts of complications in who can access data.
Mhm.
You have your emails as one area. You have your intranet or the general information for the running of the firm. You have a document management system, the practice management. All of these are different silos, and so it's really early days in how is generative AI going to be useful instead of you having to use one form of AI in one system and one form in another. And so who knows if we'll see market consolidation where, say, DMS and PMS merge together. Who knows? But
Well, you mentioned
it's really early, is what I'm saying. So it's hard to say.
you did mention Microsoft Copilot, iManage, and other already licensed systems. Do you have any advice on how law firms should assess whether to embrace the Gen AI add-ons in those systems that are already bundled in?
I guess one challenge is the already bundled in that you have no. Basically, if you have an on-premise or you manage the installations, you have a level of control. You can choose not to upgrade, but then you've got the headache that you have to upgrade eventually from a security perspective or feature perspective. Whereas if you use a cloud system, one day you click and suddenly there's all these other features there. So it's a tricky one in those add-ons. But I guess another key area is licensing and the non-trivial expense of these systems, whether they're either add-ons to your existing license, so suddenly you go to renew and there's been a fairly significant increase, or you're paying extra for these features. And like at the end of the day, and I don't wish this to be pessimistic and against generative AI, because it is useful and it does help you. It's just that it's not yet fully clear cut how useful that is and where it's useful in the sense that you can just rely on the results versus you use it as a first draft and then you effectively rework it yourself in your own way of thinking. And like one of the ways I've used generative AI recently is I'm have really atrocious handwriting, and so I was doing something completely outside of work and it was non-sensitive information. And Google have a really cool system called Notebook LM. And sorry, when I say Google, my Android phone just picked up saying, "Oh, you want to talk to me?" Sorry about that. Yes, it's listening to what I say, but and so I put in my notes, the scan of my notes, and was able to get some really great summaries and action items where I asked a prompt. And at the end of the day, I didn't use that output. I copied and pasted it, and then I rewrote everything. But it was really useful in going from my scroll versus my fairly flawed memory of what had happened and the result. It meant I was still quicker. That's really not answering your question, but it's it's still early days. At the ILTA conference last week, it was very much a generative AI overload of everyone coming up with bells and whistles of generative AI this and AI that. But yes, it's a
Um,
tricky.
do you see bespoke in-house AI solutions that are being developed by large firms becoming accessible to mid-tier firms, or will that gap widen moving forward?
I think so. I think some firms are naturally entrepreneurial and are are interested in kind of offering services and obviously to make money, but to sell them. A big challenge in that area is the cost of maintaining that system and keeping it going. And fundamentally, law firms aren't IT development houses, and so it's yes, I feel that there'll be some in that. Some of it is called white labeling, where a firm has a system and then they have contract terms in place with the provider that they can then rebadge that and offer it to others. So yeah, yes, there'll be a level of that, but I don't know how extensive that would be.
I do have one last question for you, but I might pivot quickly to one of the audience questions. If you don't mind answering this one, might put you on the spot a little bit, but we all love a real life example. And Rodrigue, so sorry if I'm butchered that, but they want to know what AI software is used by firms like Gilbert and Tobin. Is it internally developed or outsourced to a service provider? And if it is outsourced, is it available to other law firms? What feedback do lawyers using it give in terms of benefits, drawbacks, and reliability?
There's a whole lot of questions there. So
Yeah.
we 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 have a team of data scientists. So we've made an investment to have a level of internal tools. And so if you can imagine, data scientists are fairly hot property. So it's a non-trivial investment in having a team. And then we've run quite a few pilots of various tools for certain scenarios. We also run a lot of pilots of external systems. So yeah, yes, we definitely have some internally developed. They're largely just for internal use. We haven't really outsourced in the sense of engaged a third-party provider to make something bespoke for us. We may, but we haven't yet. So on the, is it available to other law firms? The general purpose, so the Harveys and the other systems out there, obviously they're available to everyone, and I'm not trying to sell Harvey, but they have one of the biggest marketing budgets, and they're very significant valuation. So it's the certainly the name you'll come across a lot. So all of those are accessible, but there's a non-trivial cost to these things, and they're charging. Sometimes it's annual subscriptions, sometimes it's based on headcount or how many people per month or per year. So that it is expensive as well. Feedback, yeah, that's an interesting one. So we definitely run pilots, and part of that is selectively choosing people who have the capacity, have the interest, and are willing to have the tolerance to invest their time, and that it may not work, and to give you valuable feedback. Not everyone has that capacity or willingness to want to do more to help the firm and not necessarily help themselves. And yes, so all of that requires a fairly significant investment in the support, like people like myself, supporting the lawyers and running those pilots and understanding the feedback and working out how to improve things or distill that knowledge and share it with others. It's a lot of effort.
You mentioned cost before, and we had a question from one of the audience that came through during registration that might be quite relevant here, but they want to know, how should firms weigh the cost benefit of using paid subscription tools like ChatGPT, which could be like $30 a month, compared to more bespoke legal focused platforms that could go up to $550 a month?
Yes. Cost, and what, to give an answer that isn't answering a question, but the existential in what is this? What does all of this mean if we, at the end of the day, start reducing billable hours? Then what does this mean for the whole legal ecosystem and the business model of law, the legal profession? But to get, so I don't have an answer on that. It's a very big question that is going to be troubling many people for a long time in the future. But yes, it's a very good question. I guess it's a really tricky one, because the ChatGPT at $30 a user a month is a general purpose tool that's going to help you with general purpose things. So it may be valuable and it may be useful, and you may get more than $30 value a month. but you may
Mhm.
not always get, if you have 100 people or 50 people, you may not get a return for every person. It's a tricky thing in who gets access to these things, and are they actually using it, and do you have some form of monitoring usage
Yeah.
monitoring, and what are their activities, and are they actually using it? Should they have the license, or should you somehow rationalize that and remove licenses? No one likes getting things removed, but it's an economic decision. Whereas a more bespoke system, you you definitely want to be very selective in piloting that and working out, say, by practice group or seniority, where that would be appropriate. Because if you think about it, for a partner, special counsel, senior associate, someone who is very experienced, then using a generative AI tool is going to be incredibly powerful for that person, because they already know the answer and they already have a very good idea on what they're expecting. Therefore,
Mhm.
they can use this to give them great insights and help them. Whereas someone who is, say, a paralegal or a junior isn't going to have the same level of scrutiny and their gut feeling on, a lifetime of knowing when things went wrong and what to look out for. And so it can be really dangerous in from the hallucination and from the these things are incredibly persuasive, and it can really fool you very, very easily in um, we're human, and when we read things, our eye skips over it, and it's really easy that the generative AI output can have things in there that your eye has skipped, but it's actually wrong.
Mhm. I want to, just looking at the time, wrap up with this last question before we jump back into the audience questions. Looking ahead, Matthew, what changes do you expect Gen AI to bring to the role of lawyers over the next 3 to 5 years?
It's a really, I look forward to knowing in 3 to 5 years what's happened, but um, I, look, I think there's equally dystopian and utopian where it depends. You could say this could have a significant impact to the structure of firms and the idea of paralegal, clerk, graduate, lawyer, and how big that intake is, um, legal training, and how do people learn on the job. That's one area where it could have an impact. And the other
Mhm.
is, I guess, the more positive in how do we do away with fairly low value work so that we can focus on doing the really high value work? And how do we use this as a force magnifier to do more and to help be proactive and help clients in areas that the client hasn't yet articulated, but you can use these systems to help power you to do more and be more helpful for the client. Therefore, the client is more interested in giving you more work in the future and paying your bills. Um,
Mhm.
I'm giving you non-answers, but I guess
It's
one of my answers, which wasn't actually that question, but something that is an enormous worry, is deep fakes. And I
Mhm.
was pondering, should I do this? But some of the deep fake systems out there, you can give it 1 or 2 minutes of video or audio, and it will give you a very realistic conversational, like video or voice agent that you can then interact with in real time. And
yeah.
that's something that um, I think a fair bit of the, not necessarily data breaches, but some of the, digital um, crimes, digital issues we're finding may come down to, you know, bad actors or whatever you call them, but criminals using cutting edge technologies.
Mhm. Yeah.
No,
It's
that wasn't part
terrifying.
of it, but that's something that I just wanted to mention that is
Yeah.
major worry.
Yeah, well, there's been quite a few cases around the world in the last year or so where a lot of businesses got in trouble because of
Yeah.
deepfakes. It's
Yes.
definitely not worthy to consider. Matthew, thank you so much. I've got a lot of questions here in the chat. I want to focus maybe on a couple that would have a more broader appeal to the rest of the audience. There's a few that are quite niche. I do appreciate your offer to maybe collate some of those and give you the opportunity to answer them, and then I can send that out as part of the follow-up.
And look, I don't know, maybe who knows, maybe some people are still interested in having a part two. I don't know, but it's really fascinating and it's really changing rapidly, and no one has all the answers. So I'd be open to having a chat further.
Yeah. Let me maybe tackle a couple more. Earlier in the conversation, you mentioned something along the lines of training once you've got AI tools implemented. How do you get to roll this out firm-wide and make sure that there is an uptake? Like one of the questions is, should firms set up an AI committee to help facilitate
Yes.
that process? Is there any tips on that?
Absolutely, to have some kind of futures or AI committee, which needs juniors in there, it needs operations support people, it needs risk people, it needs partners, it needs, to represent the firm. Absolutely, it needs people, both positive voices and negative voices, and everyone there to help. Absolutely. It's quite an investment though in everyone is busy, and it's a tricky thing to get the right mix and the right investment. But yeah, yes, absolutely.
Um, for those that are a little less tech savvy, which I would put myself into that bucket, what's the easiest way to learn effective AI prompts to make the most out of the tools?
There's a professor in Wharton Business School in, I think, Pennsylvania, but in the US, called Ethan Mollick, Mollick. And Ethan, I'd say he's the preeminent academic. He's maybe the preeminent person who his suggestion is you need to invest 10 hours time in learning. So some of it is self-taught. I can send some links, but he has a website called One Useful Thing and moreusefulthings.com. And there's some really, really useful tips on prompting. And there's another, so OpenAI and various providers have their version of prompting. There's another one called Prompt Engineering Guide.ai. So there's a lot of materials out there, but at the end of the day, it boils down to you having a go and experimenting and having the discipline of just chipping away and iterating and learning. Yeah. It
We've
just
still
takes
got
time.
quite a few people on, Matthew. So if you don't mind going just maybe a
Sure.
couple of minutes over, I've got a question from Truman here. If a law firm is to use AI in a client matter, what authority is required from the client to do so? Obviously, protecting client confidential information will always need to be protected, but like all technology systems, breaches can happen.
Yes. So I'm not a lawyer. Yes, it's a really it's a very, very good question. I'm not going to give an answer because I don't know the answer, but you definitely need to have that conversation with your client and to come to some form of understanding between the two of you and what's appropriate, what's not appropriate, and how you'd use it. And obviously, you'd be doing these things so that you can give them a better deal. So, meaning you're doing more for the fee you charge them, that you're giving them better value.
Mhm.
But it's a very, very good question. I'm sure we'd all like to know the answer, the right answer on that one.
Well, let's see, what have we got here? There's quite a few people asking for some software recommendations. If you're comfortable to put any names out there, what are some AI software for lawyers that are currently the market leaders that you think are worthwhile
But,
looking into?
but by far the biggest is, so just bear in mind that all of this is quite immature in the technology and the implementation, and they're still evolving. So Harvey by far has like Harvey's valued at something like 5 billion US, and one of the investors in Harvey is OpenAI. And they have very deep links between Harvey and OpenAI. I'm not a seller of Harvey, by the way. I get no commission from this. But they have the biggest marketing budget. And so you hear about Harvey a lot. It's an expensive product. And so there are competitors to Harvey. And one of the reasons I went to the ILTA conference last week was actually to see what is out there that isn't yet in our market, but what are other tools we should be considering that we could bring into the market effectively. Because, at the end of the day, to a startup or to a system provider, they'll only come to a market if they feel it's worthwhile the effort to enter a market. And so, I don't know how the Australian market is rated against other regions out there, but it's, a lot of the funding in legal tech is in the US, and the US market is enormous. And so it takes a while for systems to then come to our market as well. That's my long-winded way of saying Harvey, and there are others out there, but there are definitely others out there that are competitors to Harvey, but aren't necessarily in Australia yet.
Actually, we might end on this question. So just in regards to Harvey, Marina would like to know, is Harvey trained on Australian law? Do you know?
That's a very good question. You should ask Harvey. So Harvey, I believe that they've been slowly putting in place arrangements with LexisNexis and other legal publishers so that there's some level of interaction between Harvey and legal stores. So is it trained on Australian data? No, not unless to the extent that the OpenAI GPT model has had a level of Australian data illegally scraped in US fair use way of doing things.
Yeah, right. Well, Matthew, thank you so much. I appreciate the chat. I've learned a lot, certainly. What I will do is collate some of these questions, but also may I suggest there's quite a few people in the chat that asked if they could maybe reach out to you directly if you're open to that. I'm sure maybe connect on LinkedIn and go from there.
Yeah, to an extent that I have a day job. This is not part of my day job, and so I'm fallible and finite. But yes, of course, I'm happy to chat, and I guess it'd be interesting how many questions overlap between multiple people where we can kind of just give answers versus one-on-one. So, but yeah, it's fascinating, really fascinating, very early days, and yeah, no one has all the answers for sure. So I'm happy to contribute where possible.
Thank you so much, Matthew. Appreciate your time today. Hope you enjoyed the rest of this rainy afternoon.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Bye,
Bye.
everyone.
Bye.